Mercedes is in trouble with rivals, bringing new cars to Miami, and McLaren finally understands the Mercedes PU, and Ferrari's upgrades could be a game changer. Let's get into the latest F1 news. Picture this: 3 races into the 2026 Formula One season, and McLaren, the reigning Constructors' champions, find themselves sitting further back than anyone expected. Mercedes is absolutely flying. Ferrari is right there behind them. And the papaya cars? They are scrambling to figure out their own package. That is not the story anyone wrote in the preseason previews. But here we are. And somehow, despite all of that, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri are not panicking. They are not pointing fingers. They are not throwing anyone under the bus. They are actually saying that closing the gap to Mercedes is entirely within their own hands. Today we are going deep on exactly what has been happening inside the McLaren garage, why this slow start is more complicated than it looks on the surface, and why the Miami Grand Prix could genuinely be the moment everything shifts. Stay with me, because the story building here is absolutely fascinating. Let us start from the beginning of this 2026 season, because you need that context to understand just how surprising McLaren's situation actually is. Heading into this year, the expectations around the Woking outfit were sky high. They came off the back of a Constructors' Championship win. Norris had proven himself as a genuine title contender, and Oscar Piastri had emerged as one of the most composed and dangerous young drivers on the entire grid. The momentum was real. The confidence was real. And then the new regulations arrived and changed everything. The 2026 season represents one of the biggest technical shakeups Formula One has seen in years. New power unit regulations, a revised aerodynamic philosophy, and a fundamental rethinking of how these cars generate performance. Every single team has had to essentially tear up whatever they learned about building a competitive car and start again with a completely different set of rules. And when you do that, the teams that understand their new package fastest are the ones who get out front early. Right now, that team is Mercedes. Mercedes has looked absolutely dominant across the first 3 Grands Prix of 2026. We are not talking about marginal advantages here. We are talking about a level of control and pace that has made them look like they have cracked the new formula in a way nobody else has yet. Kimi Antonelli, still just a young driver in his second full season, has been sensational. He currently leads the Drivers' Championship, which in itself is a remarkable storyline. His teammate George Russell is right there as well. Together, they have turned Mercedes back into the kind of force that dominated the sport during the hybrid era. And frankly, the rest of the grid is still working out how to respond. Ferrari have been the second strongest outfit through the opening 3 rounds. Not close enough to genuinely threaten Mercedes for wins consistently, but positioned firmly as the best of the rest. That is actually a strong position to be in, because it means they are accumulating points, staying relevant in both championship battles, and gathering data on a package that still has room to grow. Ferrari doing Ferrari things in terms of being competitive, but just out of reach of the very top, is somehow both comforting and frustrating at the same time. And then there is McLaren, sitting behind both of those teams after a start that has been defined by 2 very specific problems. First, and perhaps most fundamentally, they have a car that is still not fully understood by the engineers or the drivers. That sounds alarming, but it is actually more common than people realize at the beginning of a new regulatory era. When you introduce something as complex as the 2026 technical regulations, teams do not always immediately grasp every nuance of what makes their particular interpretation of those rules work at its best. The setup window can be tricky. The balance characteristics can be hard to predict. The interaction between the new aerodynamic surfaces and the new power unit can throw up surprises that the simulations never quite captured. But it is the second problem that has really hurt McLaren's championship standing in these early rounds: technical reliability issues. Now, we are not going to get into the specific mechanical details of every problem they have had, because honestly, some of that information is still not fully public, and we want to stick to what we actually know. But what we do know is that the team has experienced technical setbacks that have cost them points they should have scored. When you are already behind on pure pace, losing additional points to mechanical gremlins is a double punishment. You suffer when things go wrong, and then you also suffer because you are not able to generate the learning and feedback from competitive running that would help you understand the car better. It becomes a frustrating cycle. So how are Norris and Piastri actually feeling about all of this? Because you might expect some frustration to be leaking out. You might expect at least one of them to be making pointed comments about needing faster updates or being let down by the package. But that is not what we are hearing. Both drivers have been notably calm, notably measured, and actually quite optimistic. Their message coming into the Miami round is essentially this: we know what needs to improve, we know we have the capability to improve it, and the work is in our hands now. That is a really interesting psychological posture to take, and it tells you something important about the culture inside McLaren right now. This is not a team in crisis mode. This is a team that has been through enough in recent years to know that early season struggles do not define where you end up. Cast your mind back to previous seasons, where McLaren appeared to have found a level of competitiveness that surprised everyone mid-season after a difficult start. The team has proven they can develop aggressively once they have a handle on what direction they need to go. And right now, the direction is becoming clearer. Miami represents a real opportunity, not just because it is the next race on the calendar and the team desperately needs points, but because this is exactly the kind of event where we typically see significant technical upgrades being introduced. McLaren are expected to bring a meaningful update package to Florida. So are Ferrari and Redbull, by the way, which means Miami could genuinely function as a reset point for the entire competitive order. If McLaren nail their updates and get them working correctly from the first session, the numbers could look very different by Sunday evening. That is not wishful thinking. That is a reasonable reading of where the sport often goes after a technically disruptive rule change when teams start to converge on their understanding. There is also something worth noting about the specific track characteristics at Miami that could play into McLaren's hands. The circuit has a mix of high-speed sections and tight technical complexes that generally reward a car with good mechanical balance and strong traction characteristics. If McLaren's new package addresses some of the balance issues that have been holding them back, this track profile could accelerate the gap closure compared to somewhere like a pure, high downforce circuit, where the aerodynamic deficit would be more exposed. We will have to see how the data looks when practice begins, but there are legitimate reasons to think Miami is a circuit where McLaren can show a more competitive face. Now let us talk about the bigger picture of this championship fight, because it genuinely is fascinating from a narrative standpoint. Antonelli leading the drivers' standings is such a compelling story. Here is a driver who came into Formula One just last year, navigated his debut season with impressive composure, and has now burst out of the gates in 2026 inches, a way that has put the established names firmly on notice. The question everyone is asking is whether that pressure he is placing on his teammate and on the rest of the grid is sustainable. Does he have the experience to manage a full championship campaign? Does he have the mental resources to deal with the moments when things go wrong? So far, he has given every indication that the answer to both questions is yes. But a 20-race season is a long test, and it has only just begun. The pressure that Antonelli's strong start creates for George Russell is also worth examining. Russell has been one of the more consistently underrated talents in the paddock for several years now. He is fast. He is precise. He is intelligent about how he manages a race. But being outperformed by a younger teammate who is generating all the buzz is not a comfortable situation for any driver, regardless of their experience level. How Russell responds to that internal challenge within the Mercedes garage could be one of the defining subplots of the season. Back to McLaren, though, because that is where our story today is really focused. The confidence that both Norris and Piastri are projecting is not just PR speak. When you listen to how they are framing the challenge, there is a specificity to it that suggests they genuinely understand what has been going wrong and have genuine belief that those problems have solutions. Norris, in particular, has shown over the last couple of seasons that he is a driver who communicates with extraordinary clarity about what he needs from a car and why. His feedback loop with the engineering team is considered one of the strongest in the paddock. If the engineers are bringing solutions to Miami that address the specific characteristics Norris has been calling for, there is every reason to believe the improvement will be real rather than cosmetic. Piastri, meanwhile, brings a different kind of strength to the partnership. Where Norris can sometimes show his frustrations, Piastri operates with a level of emotional neutrality that is almost uncanny for someone his age. He breaks down problems with an almost clinical precision, does not waste energy getting upset about things he cannot control, and consistently finds a way to extract more from the car than the raw pace might suggest is available. In a team that is working through a difficult period, having that kind of anchoring presence from both your lead drivers is invaluable. Both of them pushing in the same direction, both of them with constructive rather than destructive energy, makes the development process faster and more effective. The Constructors' Championship is still wide open at this stage of the season. 3 races worth of points does not define anything. Teams have come back from far worse positions after difficult starts to win championships before. What matters right now is momentum. What matters is the next race, the next update, the next step forward. And from everything we are hearing from inside the McLaren camp, that momentum is precisely what they are targeting when the cars roll out in Miami. Here is the thing that I find most compelling about where McLaren sits right now. The teams that win championships are not always the ones who start fastest. They are the teams that develop the most effectively across a season, that understand their car at the deepest level, and that maximize every single point available to them from the moment their package comes together. McLaren did that in previous seasons, and they learned hard lessons along the way about what happens when you do not capitalize on your strengths at the right moments. Those lessons are baked into the DNA of this team now. Miami is not just another race weekend. For McLaren, it is genuinely a statement moment. Come to Florida, show the updates work, show the drivers are extracting everything from the package, and suddenly, the gap to Mercedes looks like a challenge rather than an insurmountable deficit. Norris and Piastri know this. The engineering team knows this. And you can absolutely bet that everyone at the factory back in Woking has been working towards this specific moment. So keep your eyes on McLaren this weekend, not just on the results, because the results will tell one part of the story. Watch the pace through practice. Watch how the car responds to setup changes. Watch whether the correlation between simulation and real-world performance has improved. Those are the signals that will tell you whether this team is genuinely back on its trajectory or whether there is still more work to do. The championship is young, the season is long, and if McLaren gets this right, the second half of 2026 could look very different from the opening chapter. And that is exactly the kind of storyline that makes Formula One worth watching every single week. Picture this: 1 month of silence. No engines screaming, no tire smoke, no battles through Suzuka's iconic corners. And now Formula One is back, and it is coming back with a bang. Miami is the destination, and if you thought the championship was already spicy, wait until you hear what every single team has planned for this weekend. Welcome back. And if you are new here, buckle up, because today we are breaking down everything you need to know about the Miami Grand Prix, why this weekend is arguably the most technically significant race of the entire 2026 season so far, and what Ferrari, McLaren, Redbull, and others are bringing to Florida that could completely reshape the championship standings. We are talking aerodynamic upgrades, regulation changes, a longer practice session that tells you everything about how serious this weekend really is, and a title fight that is tighter and more unpredictable than anyone expected heading into the first American stop of the year. Stay with me through this entire video, because at the end, I am going to give you my honest assessment of who I think benefits most from everything happening this weekend, and who might actually be in trouble. Trust me, you do not want to miss that. So let us start from the beginning. The Formula One calendar in 2026 has already had its fair share of drama, and not just on track. The races in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia were cancelled, which created this unusual gap of about a month since the last race at Suzuka in Japan. A whole month. For a sport that usually operates at a relentless pace, that kind of extended break changes things. Teams have had extra time in the factories. Engineers have had more time to analyze data, run simulations, and finalize developments that might otherwise have arrived later in the season. And crucially, every team has used that window to prepare a significant package of upgrades specifically timed for Miami. This is not a coincidence. Teams do not just randomly decide to bring their biggest development updates to Miami. The timing here is strategic and very deliberate. The cancellations essentially handed every team an extra few weeks of preparation time, and the competitive teams at the front of the grid have made full use of it. So when you watch qualifying and the race this weekend, remember that what you are seeing on track reflects weeks of extra work that would not have happened under a normal calendar. Now let us talk about Ferrari specifically, because Fred Vasseur, the team principal, has confirmed that the Scuderia HP Ferrari squad is bringing aerodynamic updates to Miami. He did not get into exhaustive detail, which is pretty standard in Formula One because you never want to give your rivals too much advance information. But the confirmation itself is significant. Ferrari has been competitive this season, but has also shown some inconsistency. And any aerodynamic improvement at this stage of the championship can have an outsized impact on where you end up in the standings over the rest of the year. Think about what aerodynamic updates really mean in the context of modern Formula One. It is not just about going faster in a straight line. Downforce, drag reduction, airflow management through the diffuser, front wing efficiency, the way air interacts with the floor of the car. All of these elements connect to everything else. Better aerodynamics means better tire behavior in some circumstances, better stability under braking, better rotation through high-speed corners. A well-executed aero package in Formula One can transform a car that is merely competitive into one that can genuinely challenge for victory every weekend. Ferrari knows this, their engineers know this, and Miami is where they are bringing their answer. But Ferrari is not alone here. This is what makes Miami such a fascinating technical battleground. Multiple teams are arriving in Florida with significant upgrade packages. McLaren, who have been impressively strong this season, are expected to bring developments of their own. Redbull, too, are not standing still. When you have multiple top teams all introducing meaningful changes to their cars in the same weekend, the normal order of things gets scrambled. A team that has been third or fourth fastest might suddenly find themselves at the front. A team that has been dominant might discover their advantage has shrunk, or even disappeared entirely. These are the weekends that make Formula One so gripping to follow. And here's the thing about upgrade races that casual fans sometimes underestimate. It is not just about which team spent the most money or has the most sophisticated wind tunnel. It is about execution. Which team understood what their car actually needed? Which team correctly identified the weaknesses they needed to address? Which team has brought an upgrade that works as intended straight out of the box, rather than needing 3 or 4 races of fine-tuning before it delivers its promise? The teams that get that execution right in Miami this weekend gain a compounding advantage. They build on that upgrade in future races, while rivals are still trying to close the gap. Now there is another layer to this Miami weekend that goes beyond just the upgrade packages. And honestly, this might be the most important structural element of the entire weekend. New regulations are coming into effect. Changes to the 2026 technical regulations are being introduced. And every team, every driver, every engineer has to absorb and adapt to these changes starting this weekend. In Formula One, regulation changes are never trivial. Even relatively small adjustments to the rulebook can create significant performance differentials between teams depending on how well they anticipated and prepared for those changes in advance. Here is why that matters so much. Some teams will have done more homework on these new rules than others. Some will have optimized their upgrade packages specifically with these regulatory changes in mind. Others might arrive and discover that their development direction needs to be slightly or significantly reconsidered in light of how the rules play out in practice. This is where the big picture technical battles of a Formula One season get decided. Not always in the dramatic wheel-to-wheel moments we all love to watch, but in these quieter, more strategic moments where the smartest team reads the situation better than everyone else. And there is a very telling sign of just how significant these combined changes are. The FIA and Formula One have extended the Friday practice session for this weekend. Normally, in a sprint weekend format, the Friday free practice session is a single 1-hour session. That is it. 1 hour to learn the circuit, set the car up, and prepare for qualifying. This weekend it has been extended to 90 minutes, half an hour extra. That might not sound like much, but in Formula One terms, 30 additional minutes of track time is genuinely valuable. The decision to extend that session is a direct acknowledgement that the combination of new regulations and widespread upgrades means teams and drivers need more time to properly understand what they are working with before the competitive action begins. Miami is also the second sprint weekend of the 2026 season, which adds yet another layer of complexity. Sprint weekends have a compressed format that puts enormous pressure on teams to get things right immediately. You do not have the luxury of 2 full practice sessions to slowly gather data and iterate on your setup. You have 1 session, and then it is competitive action. Bringing a major upgrade package to a sprint weekend is a calculated risk. If the upgrade works as expected, you can be competitive from the very first moment. If it does not behave as the simulation suggested, you are scrambling to understand why, with almost no time to adjust. Let us talk about the championship picture for a moment, because this backdrop makes the Miami upgrades even more meaningful. Kimi Antonelli has been on remarkable form and leads the championship standings. That is a sentence that would have surprised many people at the start of the year, and it absolutely changes the dynamic of what every other team is trying to achieve in Miami. George Russell and Mercedes are under pressure. Ferrari needs points. Red Bull needs to prove their competitiveness. McLaren wants to keep building their championship challenge. Every team arrives in Florida with something specific to prove and something specific to lose. When the championship is tight, the pressure on these upgrade packages becomes even more intense. A good weekend in Miami for Ferrari, with their aero updates working as intended, could swing momentum significantly. A poor weekend for any of the frontrunners could mean giving away precious points that are very difficult to recover later in the season. This is high stakes. Formula One inch every sense. Now let me address something that I think deserves more attention than it usually gets in the pre-race buildup. The Miami circuit itself. Hard Rock Stadium complex has a very particular character. It is a street-adjacent circuit with a mix of slow technical sections and some higher-speed flowing sectors. Aerodynamic efficiency matters here, but so does mechanical grip and how well the car manages its tires over the duration of a stint. The upgrades that teams are bringing need to work for this specific circuit, not just in the abstract. And the teams that have done the best job of marrying their upgrade direction to the specific demands of Miami will have an immediate advantage. Temperature is also a factor. Florida weather can be unpredictable. Heat affects tire degradation. It affects how the brakes behave. It affects how much cooling airflow the power unit requires. If a team has introduced a new aerodynamic configuration that changes airflow patterns around the car, they need to be absolutely certain that cooling remains adequate in Florida conditions. These are the invisible technical challenges that the cameras never quite capture, but that the engineers are absolutely focused on. There is also the human element, the drivers. A month away from racing means a month of simulator work, of fitness training, of mental preparation, but nothing fully replicates the feeling of being back in the car at race speed. The first laps of that 90-minute practice session will be a reawakening for every driver on the grid, and for the drivers who are getting used to significant new aerodynamic characteristics on their cars at the same time. That process of reacquaintance is even more complex. The best drivers in Formula One adapt quickly. They have the sensitivity to feel what the car is doing differently, communicate that to the engineers, and help dial in the setup within a very limited window of time. Miami will test that skill immediately. So where does all of this leave us as we head into the weekend? Miami 2026 is not just another race. It is a reset point. After a month of downtime, after cancellations disrupting the rhythm of the season, after weeks of intensive development work in factories across Europe, the whole championship reconvenes in Florida and essentially starts a new chapter. The upgrade race that has been building in parallel to the on-track competition since the start of the season comes to its first major settlement. We are going to learn a great deal about the true pecking order of 2026 this weekend. My honest assessment? Ferrari stands to benefit significantly if their aerodynamic updates are well executed. The team has the engineering talent and the motivation to get this right. But I also think McLaren is dangerous here. They have been consistent and smart in their development approach all season. Red Bull will not be far away. And Mercedes, with Antonelli carrying the championship lead, has every reason to protect that position aggressively. Whatever happens, Miami is going to be one of those weekends you look back on at the end of the season and say, that was where the championship really took its shape. The upgrades, the new regulations, the sprint format pressure, the extended practice that tells you how unusual this all is. Everything points to a technically explosive and genuinely unpredictable weekend. Make sure you are subscribed because I will be covering every session, every development, every twist across the whole Miami weekend. Drop your predictions in the comments right now. Who do you think benefits most from the upgrade battle? Can Ferrari close the gap? Does Antonelli extend his lead? Or does someone finally stop him? Let me know, and I will see you back here for the next one. Formula 1 Inch 2026 is absolutely wild right now. And if you thought you knew how this season was going to play out, think again. Because everything we expected has been turned completely upside down, and the man at the center of one of the biggest storylines in motorsport right now just came out and said something that nobody really saw coming. Red Bull's team principal, Laurent Mekies, has openly admitted that his team is struggling. He's explained exactly why, and he's told us what's coming next. And trust me, if you care at all about where this championship is heading, you need to hear this. So let's talk about what is actually happening in Formula One right now in 2026, because the landscape has shifted in a way that feels almost surreal if you've been following this sport for any amount of time. Mercedes, the team that dominated the turbo hybrid era for nearly a decade, then fell off dramatically, then spent years trying to claw their way back, is now back at the front. They're not just competitive, they are the benchmark. They are setting the pace. They are the team everyone else is chasing. And it feels almost like we've traveled back in time to those early hybrid years when the silver cars were simply untouchable. And then there's Red Bull, the team that won everything. The team that made the sport feel almost processional at points because they were just so far ahead of everyone else. Right now, Red Bull is in the uncomfortable position of being the ones doing the chasing. The gap in lap times is not flattering. It's the kind of deficit that makes headlines, that gets fans talking, and that puts enormous pressure on everyone inside the Milton Keynes factory. This is not the Red Bull we've been used to watching dominate. This is a team that is genuinely fighting to find answers. But here's where it gets really interesting. Mekies hasn't come out and made excuses. He hasn't tried to deflect or spin the narrative in a way that avoids the uncomfortable truth. What he's done instead is something that actually takes a certain kind of confidence, and that is he's acknowledged that the situation Red Bull finds itself in right now is the direct result of a deliberate strategic decision that the team made during the previous season. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't bad luck. This was a calculated gamble. And right now, they are living with the consequences of that gamble, not paying off immediately. Think about that for a second. That is a fascinating admission, because it tells you that Red Bull knew, at some point during 2025, that they were making a choice that would cost them in the short term in exchange for what they hoped would be a bigger gain later on. They bet on a direction, they committed to it, And now, as the 2026 season gets underway and the results are not what the team or its fans would want, Mekis is standing in front of the cameras and saying, yes, this is where we are, this is why, and here is what we are doing about it. Now, before we get into what Red Bull is planning next, let's take a moment to appreciate just how dramatically the pecking order has changed this year. Because it's not just Mercedes rising and Red Bull struggling. Kimi Antonelli, the young Mercedes driver who has been earmarked as a future star for years, is currently leading the Drivers' Championship. Antonelli, at the top of the standings. That sentence alone would have seemed like pure fantasy just a couple of seasons ago. But here we are. And Antonelli has clearly taken to this new era of Formula One regulations in a way that is putting serious pressure on his teammate George Russell and raising some fascinating questions about the internal dynamics at Mercedes. And speaking of this new era, the 2026 regulations are genuinely unlike anything we've seen introduced into Formula One in a very long time. These aren't just small tweaks. The cars are different. The aerodynamic philosophy has shifted. The power units have been redesigned. And the way teams approach setup and development has fundamentally changed. Some teams have adapted brilliantly. Others are clearly finding it harder to unlock the potential of what these new rules allow. And that divide between the teams who have nailed the concept and those who haven't is creating one of the most unpredictable and genuinely exciting competitive orders that Formula One has seen in years. Red Bull, interestingly enough, isn't struggling on every front. Mekis has pointed out something that might come as a surprise to some people. The power unit that Red Bull is running in 2026, the engine produced right there in Milton Keynes, is actually performing well. In fact, Mekis described it as a solid foundation, almost unexpectedly so, given that Red Bull's in-house engine operation is still relatively young compared to the established manufacturers. So the issues aren't coming from the engine side of the equation. The problems Red Bull is dealing with are on the chassis and aerodynamic side, and that's where the development work is being focused with urgency. Which brings us to Miami. And this is where things get genuinely exciting if you're a fan of this sport. Because Red Bull is not sitting still. They are not accepting the current situation and waiting for things to gradually improve over the course of the season. They are coming to Miami with what Mekis has described as a significant upgrade package for the RB22. We're not talking about a small refinement here and there. We're talking about a meaningful step in the development of the car, and the team has already been doing work to validate these updates, having run them at a filming day at Silverstone before bringing them to the race. And Mekis has been very clear about something else. Miami is not the end of the story. The upgrade that arrives at Miami is the beginning of a wave of development, not a single shot in the dark. The RB22 is going to change significantly throughout the season, and the team is treating this as a continuous development program rather than one big moment where they hope to leap forward and then consolidate. This is a team that has been through championship fights before, that has the resources and the technical expertise to mount a comeback, and that understands what it takes to turn a difficult start to a season into something more competitive. Now let's zoom out for a moment and think about why this matters so much for the championship picture. If Red Bull can close the gap to Mercedes with their Miami upgrade and the subsequent development steps, we could be looking at a genuinely open title fight. And that's not just exciting for neutrals. That's good for Formula One as a whole, because a sport where one team runs away with everything, no matter how impressive that dominance might be technically, eventually loses casual viewers and even some hardcore fans. What we have right now is a situation where Mercedes is strong, but perhaps not unbeatable if the opposition can find the right answers. Ferrari are also in the mix, and it's worth noting that Mekis himself drew a specific comparison, pointing out that among the teams currently capable of running at the front, only Red Bull and Ferrari are operating at a certain level when it comes to their development trajectory and approach. That's a significant thing to say. It suggests that Mekis believes Red Bull and Ferrari are the two teams best positioned to challenge Mercedes over the course of the season, and that confidence is rooted in something real. The McLaren question is also enormous right now. McLaren have been quietly building toward being a genuine title contender for a couple of seasons. And in 2026, they are very much in the conversation. The Miami race is being talked about as a potential turning point for several teams, not just Red Bull. Ferrari and McLaren are also bringing updates to Florida. And if multiple top teams arrive with significant upgrades simultaneously, the result could completely reshape the championship standings in ways that would have seemed impossible to predict even a few weeks ago. Let's come back to Mekis for a second, because there's something really important about the tone of what he's been saying. He hasn't been defensive. He hasn't been the kind of team principal who blames external factors or tries to minimize the problem. He's been honest about where Red Bull is, he's been specific about why, and he's been confident without being arrogant about what comes next. That's a particular kind of leadership style. And it matters because it tells you something about the culture inside that team right now. They're not panicking. They're problem solving. And that's actually consistent with how Red Bull have historically responded to adversity. This is a team that has come from behind before. This is a team that knows how to find performance under pressure. The challenge is different now because the regulations are new and the baseline is lower than they'd want it to be. But the institutional knowledge, the engineering talent, and the racing intelligence that made Red Bull so formidable in previous seasons hasn't disappeared overnight. The strategic decision that Miki's referenced, the one that was made during 2025 and that has contributed to where Red Bull is now in the early stages of 2026, is something that we should think about carefully. In Formula One, development resources are finite. Every team has to make decisions about where to allocate their engineering effort, when to stop developing one car and start focusing entirely on the next one, and how to balance short-term competitiveness with long-term positioning. Red Bull made a call. Whether that call ultimately proves to be wise or not will only become clear as the season develops. But what it demonstrates is that Red Bull are thinking about this with a long-term perspective, not just reacting to the race in front of them. That kind of strategic thinking is what separates teams that are truly competing for championships from teams that are just filling out the grid. And while Red Bull's current position in the standings might not reflect their ambitions, the approach they are taking suggests that this is a team that still believes it can compete for the title in 2026 if the development trajectory goes the way they are planning. So where does all of this leave us heading into Miami? It leaves us with one of the most anticipated race weekends of the 2026 season so far. You have Mercedes sitting comfortably at the front, with Antonelli leading the championship. You have Red Bull bringing what could be a transformative upgrade to the RB22. You have Ferrari and McLaren also arriving with significant development packages. And you have a set of regulations that nobody has fully solved yet, which means the margins between teams are not as fixed as they might appear right now. The Miami Grand Prix could genuinely change everything. It could confirm that Mercedes' advantage is real and durable. Or it could be the race where Red Bull starts the process of closing the gap and turning a difficult start into the foundation for a championship charge. Either way, it's going to tell us an enormous amount about where this season is really heading and which team has found the right answers to the questions that 2026's regulations are asking. Mekis has put his cards on the table. He's told us what happened, why it happened, and what Red Bull is doing about it. Now, the track will have the final say. And given everything that's at stake in Miami, given how open this championship still genuinely is, given that we have young drivers like Antonelli making history at the front of the field and established powerhouses fighting to reassert themselves, this is Formula One at its absolute most compelling. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our full Miami Grand Prix breakdown. Because based on everything Mekis has said and everything that's building toward that race weekend, it is going to be one for the ages. Drop your predictions in the comments right now. Can Red Bull close the gap? Is Mercedes untouchable? And what do you think of Antonelli leading the championship? Let's talk about it. Formula One is back, and we are heading to Miami for what might be the most important race weekend of the entire 2026 season so far. Welcome back to the channel. And if you are new here, buckle up, because today we are diving deep into everything you need to know before the cars hit the track in Florida. Let me start with something that I think a lot of people are sleeping on right now. Formula One has been off the grid for over a month. A forced break caused by the geopolitical situation in the Middle East pushed the calendar into chaos, and now the sport is returning to racing at a circuit that is genuinely one of the most electric atmospheres on the entire schedule. Miami is not just a race. After everything that has happened in recent weeks, this feels like a restart button for the whole championship. And restarting with so much uncertainty in the air, with technical updates hitting the grid from multiple teams simultaneously, with championship standings that already look nothing like what anyone predicted back in January, this is the kind of race weekend that defines seasons. So let us break this all down properly. We are going to talk about why this particular race matters so much beyond just the points, what is happening with the technical development war that is about to explode in the paddock, where the championship actually stands right now, and why the numbers might be misleading, and what Mercedes have been saying heading into Miami, because their message is actually fascinating and carries a lot of weight when you read between the lines. First, the context. The last time these cars were on track competitively, the world looked different. The 2026 regulations brought in one of the most sweeping overhauls in recent Formula One history. New power units, revised aerodynamic philosophies, changes to how these cars generate and deploy energy. The teams that started the season well did so with machinery that was genuinely built for this new era, and some of those teams were not the ones you might have expected to come out on top. Now here is where it gets interesting. A break of over a month in Formula One is an enormous amount of time from a development standpoint. While the circuit sat empty and the race calendar held its breath, the factories did not stop. Engineers kept working. Designers kept pushing. And what is about to show up in the Miami paddock is not the same collection of cars that raced in those opening events. Multiple major teams are bringing significant updates to Florida, and that means the competitive order we saw in the early part of the season could look very different by Sunday evening. Ferrari, McLaren, and Redbull are all understood to be bringing notable development packages to Miami. Now think about what that means in the context of a 2026 grid that is still finding its feet with these new regulations. We have had a handful of races. The teams that extracted performance early had a data advantage, but also had less time on their hands compared to those who sacrificed early results to focus on longer development cycles. Miami could be the moment where that calculation either pays off or falls apart spectacularly. McLaren is coming in with momentum and serious engineering depth. They have shown across recent seasons that their ability to iterate on a concept rapidly is one of their biggest strengths. And in a year where the rulebook has been torn up and rewritten, that kind of adaptability is worth its weight in gold. Red Bull, meanwhile, are carrying the pressure of expectation. They have never been a team that accepts being anywhere other than the sharp end of the grid, and you can guarantee that what they bring to Miami has been developed with absolute intensity over the past several weeks. And Ferrari, always Ferrari, with the passion of an entire nation, riding on every aerodynamic improvement and every tenth of a second they can find. But here is the team I want to talk about most right now, because their message heading into Miami is one that deserves attention. Mercedes, and specifically what they have been communicating about the position they are in and what they expect from the weekend ahead. The Silver Arrows had a complicated start to the 2026 season. Not catastrophic, not brilliant, but complicated. And in Formula One, complicated often means there is more going on beneath the surface than the results alone can tell you. Their message going into Miami essentially boils down to this idea that starting a season reasonably well means very little if you are not paying obsessive attention to what your competitors are doing and where the real performance is going to come from as the year develops. That is a remarkably honest and grounded thing to say. It is also the kind of statement that carries a warning shot within it. When a team like Mercedes tells you that a good start counts for little, they are not being humble for the sake of appearances. They are recognizing that the 2026 grid is genuinely unpredictable in a way that even the seismic shifts of 2022 were not quite prepared for. New engines, new aerodynamic concepts, new tire philosophies, all of it combining into a season where the midpoint could look absolutely nothing like the beginning. Mercedes know this because they have seen it happen before, and they have been on both sides of that story. The other part of their message, about watching the competition carefully, is equally telling, because what they are acknowledging is that the updates coming to Miami from Ferrari, McLaren, and Red Bull have the genuine potential to reshuffle the deck, not just slightly, significantly. If even one of those packages works as well on track as it does in the simulation data, you could see a team jump multiple positions in the competitive order at a single stroke. That is the nature of a regulation change year when you hit the first major update window. Now let us shift to something that I think is arguably the most fascinating storyline heading into Miami, and that is the championship standings themselves. Because here is the thing. When you look at who is actually leading the Drivers' World Championship after the opening rounds of 2026, you might do a double take. Kimi Antonelli is at the top of the standings. Yes, that Kimi Antonelli, the teenager, the rookie, the driver who came into this season carrying enormous expectations, but also enormous uncertainty about how he would handle the pressure of being at a top team in a completely new regulations era. And he has not just held his own, he has led races, he has accumulated points, he is sitting at the top of the championship and giving the impression that he has genuinely found his groove in a way that even his most confident supporters might not have predicted this quickly. What makes this so compelling as a storyline is the pressure it creates in the other direction. George Russell is his teammate. Russell is a driver of enormous talent and ambition who has been waiting patiently for his moment to really assert himself as a number one driver at a top team. Having a rookie teammate outscore you and sit above you in the championship is exactly the kind of situation that either breaks a driver or brings out the very best in them. The Miami race is going to tell us a lot about where Russell's head is and whether this dynamic is going to define Mercedes' season in ways that go beyond just lap times. George Russell is too talented and too mentally strong to let this situation spiral. But there is no question that the pressure is real, and it is building. Racing against a teammate who is delivering the results you expected to be delivering yourself is one of the most psychologically complex challenges in all of sport. And Formula One does not give you much time to process your feelings. The cars are in Miami, and whatever you are working through mentally, you still have to go out there and perform at a level that very few human beings on the planet are capable of matching. So the stakes going into this Miami weekend are genuinely enormous across multiple dimensions. You have the technical battle, where significant updates from several teams could rewrite the performance hierarchy. You have the championship narrative, with Antonelli in an extraordinary position for a first-year driver. You have the teammate dynamic at Mercedes that is quietly one of the most intriguing relationships in the paddock. And you have the backdrop of a month-long forced break that has given every team time to prepare, to develop, to plot, and to arrive in Florida feeling like this is effectively a second season opener. Miami, as a circuit, has proven itself over the years as a place where great racing happens. The atmosphere is unlike almost anywhere else on the calendar. The crowd is passionate, the setting is spectacular, and there is an energy to the weekend that tends to elevate performances. Drivers talk about circuits that inspire them, and Miami has become one of those places relatively quickly since it joined the calendar. But beyond the spectacle, this race matters strategically. The points available are the same as any other Grand Prix in terms of the Sunday race, but the sprint format, if it applies this weekend, adds another layer of competitive intensity and another opportunity for teams to gather data on how their updates are performing in real race conditions. Teams will be watching each other's pace obsessively. Every sector time, every pit stop window, every overtaking move will be analyzed in real time and fed back to the engineers who are making decisions about setup and strategy for the rest of the weekend. Here is something worth thinking about. In a year where the regulations are genuinely new and genuinely complex, The teams that are winning the development race are not necessarily the ones with the biggest budgets. Creativity, interpretation of the rules, and the ability to find performance in places that other teams have not even considered looking yet, those are the qualities that are going to separate the frontrunners from the rest as 2026 progresses. Miami is the first opportunity for the big development packages to show their hand, and the implications of what we learn this weekend will ripple forward through the entire season. For the fans, and I know a lot of you watching this are absolutely passionate about Formula One Inch, a way that goes beyond just following the results, Miami represents something genuinely exciting. It is a return to racing after an unwanted silence. It is the moment where theories about car performance and team development get tested against the cold reality of competitive lap times. And it is the kind of race weekend where surprises happen because there is just so much in flux right now that any prediction carries massive uncertainty. What I want you to take away from all of this is that Miami 2026 is not a normal race weekend in the context of a normal season. It is a pivotal moment in a season that is already proving to be far less predictable than anyone expected. The teams arriving in Florida know that what happens over the next few days could define their championship trajectory. The drivers arriving know that the pressure is dialed up to a level that even Formula One rarely produces this early in a calendar year. And Mercedes in particular have been honest enough to acknowledge that nothing is guaranteed, that a good start means very little if you are not ready for what is coming next. That kind of humility and awareness from a team with their history and their resources is actually a sign of genuine intelligence and strategic clarity. They know the fight is far from over. They know their rivals have been working hard during this break. And they know that Miami is going to give us the first real indication of where the balance of power in 2026 truly sits. So make sure you are watching this weekend. Follow the practice sessions because the update data coming in from those first few runs is going to be critical. Watch qualifying because the grid positions at Miami can make an enormous difference given the circuit characteristics. And when the race starts, watch the gap between teammates at Mercedes, watch the pace of the updated Ferrari, McLaren, and Redbull packages, and watch Antonelli because that young man looks like he has absolutely no intention of giving up the championship lead without a fight. Formula One is back. Miami is waiting. And this could be the weekend that changes everything. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you hit that subscribe button because we have got full coverage of the Miami Grand Prix coming your way this week, including qualifying analysis, race preview, and everything in between. Drop your predictions in the comments below. Who do you think takes the win in Miami? I genuinely want to know what you think. See you in the next one.